Close your eyes for a second and imagine this. You're 4 years old. It's a weekday morning. You're sitting cross-legged on the carpet in front of the TV, and you hear those opening notes. The music starts, and you see him, that warm smile, that gentle voice, walking toward a big wooden chest. Let's see what's in the Tickle Trunk today. If you just felt something in your chest, you know. For 29 years, Ernie Coombs, Mr. Dressup, was more than a TV host. He was a friend, a teacher, a constant presence in the lives of millions of Canadian children. Today, we're telling the story of the man who raised a generation and why his legacy still matters. Mr. Dressup aired on CBC from 1967 to 1996. 29 years, over 4,000 episodes. And just like the Friendly Giant, it never really changed, and that was the whole point. Every episode followed a similar format. Mr. Dressup would arrive in his living room set, greet the audience, and then the magic would begin. He'd open the Tickle Trunk, that iconic wooden chest filled with costumes and props, and transform into anyone or anything. A firefighter, a chef, a dinosaur, a pirate. The imagination was limitless. He was joined by his puppet friends, Casey, a young boy, and Finnegan, a dog, who lived in a miniature treehouse. Together they'd draw, sing, tell stories, and play. It was simple, it was gentle, and it was absolutely formative for an entire generation of Canadian kids. At its peak, Mr. Dressup was watched by over 1 million Canadian children every single day. It won awards. It defined childhood. And when Ernie Coombs passed away in 2001, the country mourned like we'd lost a family member. Because in a way, we had. But here's what's remarkable. Unlike so many other shows from that era, Mr. Dressup hasn't been forgotten. Even today, Canadians who grew up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s talk about the show with reverence. So what made it so special? And why does it still resonate decades later? Here's something that surprises a lot of people. Ernie Coombs was American. He was born in Maine and started his career in children's television in the United States, working on a show called Mistaragers. Yes, that Mr. Rogers. Ernie Coombs and Fred Rogers were colleagues and friends. In fact, Coombs appeared on Mr. Rogers as Mr. Dressup before the character ever came to Canada. In 1963, CBC was looking to create a Canadian version of Mistaragers, so they brought Fred Rogers to Canada to develop a show called Mistaragers. Note the different spelling. Ernie Coombs came along as a puppeteer and supporting performer. The show ran for 3 years, but it never quite found its footing in Canada. However, CBC executives noticed something. Whenever Ernie Coombs appeared on screen, with his costume trunk and his gentle creative energy, kids responded. They loved him. So in 1967, CBC took a chance and gave Ernie Coombs his own show. And that's how Mr. Dressup was born. The format was simple. Ernie would be himself, no character, just Ernie, and he'd use costumes, drawing, music, and imagination to engage with kids. The Tickle Trunk was introduced immediately and became the show's most iconic element. Casey and Finnegan were created as puppet companions, voiced and operated by Judith Lawrence. The show premiered on July 2, 1967, just in time for Canada's centennial celebrations. And from the very first episode, it was clear this was something special. Ernie Coombs became a Canadian citizen in 1975, and he often said that Canada gave him the opportunity to do the work he loved most. He never went back to the United States. He raised his family in Toronto. Canada became his home, and he became ours. So what made Mr. Dressup so special? Why did it resonate so deeply with Canadian kids? First, Ernie Coombs himself. He wasn't playing a character. He was just Ernie. He was genuinely kind, genuinely creative, and genuinely interested in children. He spoke to kids like they were intelligent people capable of understanding complex ideas. He never talked down to them. He never treated them like they were stupid. And kids could feel that respect. Fred Rogers once said about his friend Ernie, he understood that children are people who deserve to be taken seriously. And that's exactly what Ernie did, every single day for 29 years. Second, the Tickle Trunk. This was pure genius. The Tickle Trunk represented limitless possibility. Every time Ernie opened it, you didn't know what would come out. A cowboy hat, a tutu, a space helmet, and whatever came out would spark a whole new adventure. It taught kids that imagination was a superpower, that you could be anyone or anything if you just believed. And here's the thing. The costumes in the Tickle Trunk weren't expensive or fancy. They were simple, homemade looking, accessible. It sent the message, you can do this too. You don't need fancy toys. You just need imagination. Third, the drawing. Ernie Coombs was an artist, and drawing was a huge part of every episode. He'd sit at his easel and create these beautiful, whimsical drawings while talking to the audience. He made art feel accessible and joyful, not intimidating. For many Canadian kids, Mr. Dressup was their first introduction to the idea that they could be artists too. Fourth, Casey and Finnegan. These puppet characters were perfect companions. Casey was curious and enthusiastic. Finnegan was playful and sometimes mischievous. They represented different aspects of childhood, and their relationship with Mr. Dressup felt genuine. Judith Lawrence, who performed them, had incredible chemistry with Ernie. The three of them felt like a real family. And finally, the Canadian identity. Mr. Dressup was unapologetically Canadian. There were no attempts to make it appeal to American audiences. It was made for Canadian kids by Canadians, and Ernie, who became Canadian, and it reflected Canadian values, kindness, creativity, multiculturalism, gentleness. It said, this is who we are, and that's enough. Now let's talk about what was happening behind the scenes, because Mr. Dressup was more remarkable than most people realize. Ernie Coombs was incredibly hands-on with the show. He didn't just show up and read lines. He was involved in planning, costume selection, activity development. He cared deeply about what the show was teaching kids and how it was presenting the world to them. Judith Lawrence, who performed Casey and Finnegan, was Ernie's creative partner for the entire run of the show. She was crouched below the set, puppeteering both characters simultaneously, switching between Casey's young voice and Finnegan's dog-like speech. She and Ernie had this incredible rapport. They could improvise together, play off each other, create these genuinely funny and touching moments. The show was produced on a modest budget. The set was simple. Basically just Mr. Dressup's living room, the Tickle Trunk, and the treehouse. But that simplicity was part of the charm. It felt real, like a place you could actually visit. Ernie Coombs was also deeply committed to representation and inclusivity, though we didn't use those words back then. He made sure the show featured children of all backgrounds. He incorporated different cultures and traditions. He was one of the first children's hosts in Canada to regularly feature kids with disabilities on his show, treating them exactly like every other child, because to Ernie, they were. Here's something that often gets overlooked. Mr. Dressup was also educational, but never in an obvious way. Ernie would count while drawing. He'd talk about colors and shapes. He'd introduce new words naturally in conversation. He taught kids without them even realizing they were learning. That takes real skill. And Ernie never stopped caring. Even after decades on air, even when he could have phoned it in, he showed up every day with the same genuine warmth and enthusiasm. Crew members who worked on the show have said that Ernie was exactly the same off camera as he was on camera. There was no act. That was just who he was. In 1996, after 29 years, Mr. Dressup aired its final episode. But the decision to end the show wasn't Ernie's choice. By the mid-1990s, CBC was facing budget cuts and pressure to modernize its children's programming. Shows like Mr. Dressup and the Friendly Giant were seen as old-fashioned compared to the new wave of high-energy, fast-paced children's shows coming from the United States. There was also a significant change in 1996. Judith Lawrence, who had performed Casey and Finnegan for the entire run of the show, retired. Losing her was a huge blow. The chemistry between Ernie and Judith was irreplaceable. New puppeteers were brought in, but it wasn't the same. CBC made the decision to cancel the show. Ernie was heartbroken. He devoted his entire adult life to Mr. Dressup, and suddenly it was over. But true to form, he handled it with grace and dignity. The final episode was emotional but gentle. Just like the show itself, Mr. Dressup said goodbye, closed the Tickle Trunk one last time, and that was it. After the show ended, Ernie Coombs retired from television. He spent his final years with his family, away from the spotlight. But he never stopped being recognized. Canadians who'd grown up with him would approach him in public, often crying, to thank him for being part of their childhood. On September 18, 2001, Ernie Coombs suffered a stroke and passed away at the age of 73. The news made national headlines. CBC aired a special tribute. Thousands of Canadians shared their memories and grief. It wasn't just the loss of a television personality. It felt like losing a family member. The Canadian government offered his family a state funeral, but they declined, choosing instead a private ceremony. That felt appropriate somehow. Ernie Coombs was never about grand gestures. He was about quiet kindness and genuine connection. So what's the legacy of Mr. Dressup? Why does it still matter, more than 25 years after it ended? Because Ernie Coombs proved something important. You don't need to be flashy or loud or commercial to make a difference in children's lives. You just need to be genuine, kind, and present. Mr. Dressup taught an entire generation of Canadian kids that creativity was valuable, that imagination was powerful, that they were worthy of respect and attention. Those lessons stuck. So many Canadian artists, performers, writers, and creators cite Mr. Dressup as a formative influence. The show also represented a particular moment in Canadian broadcasting history when CBC was deeply committed to creating quality children's programming that reflected Canadian values. That commitment has waned over the decades, and we've lost something important in the process. But here's what's beautiful. Mr. Dressup hasn't been forgotten the way other shows have. Episodes are available on streaming now. The Tickle Trunk and other artifacts from the show are preserved. And most importantly, the memory of Ernie Coombs and what he meant to Canadian childhood is still alive. Parents who grew up with Mr. Dressup tell their children about him. They show them old episodes. They pass down the lesson that Ernie taught them, that kindness matters, that creativity is magic, that every child deserves to be seen and valued. Mr. Dressup wasn't just a TV show. It was a daily reminder that the world could be kind, gentle, and full of possibility. For 29 years, Ernie Coombs invited millions of Canadian children into his living room, opened the Tickle Trunk, and showed them that imagination was the greatest gift of all. And then, like all good things, it ended. But unlike so many other shows, Mr. Dressup didn't vanish. It lives on in the hearts and memories of everyone who grew up with it. It lives on in the artists and creators it inspired. It lives on every time someone opens a costume box and says, "Let's see what we can be today." Ernie Coombs gave us something precious, a childhood filled with creativity, kindness, and wonder. And for that, we'll never forget him. Thank you, Mr. Dressup. Thank you for everything. If Mr. Dressup was part of your childhood, I'd love to hear your favorite memory in the comments. What's your most vivid memory of the show? Did you have a favorite costume from the Tickle Trunk? Let's celebrate Ernie Coombs and the legacy he left behind. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're covering the shows that defined Canadian childhood. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.